Good morning. Once again, I'm Sir Roy, and this is your pre-recorded lecture discussion about component preparation or the preparation of the different blood components. So this is the main breakdown of this week's discussion. So we have blood preservation and storage. We will also discuss routine blood components along with special blood components, the component labels, and storage unit requirements. And lastly, class, all questions for your individual activity will be given throughout the lecture discussion. So I would encourage everyone to listen diligently and be able to catch these questions. Your component preparation, in its most basic definition, is a process or processes that we perform to separate the different blood components or to manufacture different blood component units from a single whole blood unit. So we perform the separation of these components via differential centrifugation. And take note, class, that the centrifugation is actually the most important factor during the component preparation because varying relative forces or relative centrifugal forces and the duration of the centrifugation will produce different blood components, which we will be discussing later on. So blood is considered as both biologic and as a form of drug. When we say biologic, meaning it is a human cellular constituent, blood is a living cell, and like any other human cells that are capable of generating and consuming energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate molecules. And when we say drug, they are basically used to provide treatments to various conditions, and the type of component to be transfused to a patient will depend on what condition this patient has or enduring from. So let us just take for an example a patient with dengue fever. So we have learned from either hematology or pathophysiology that dengue infection will result to a continuous decline in your platelet count. And if you have a critical low platelets, you will have a profuse bleeding and eventually causes fatality. And in order to prevent this from happening, in cases of severe dengue infection, your physician will prescribe the transfusion of platelet concentrate to suffice for the platelet volume of the body while your body is battling the infection and compensating for platelet production. And take note, class, that blood components or units, just like any other therapeutic drugs, is dispensed via physician's prescription or via the doctor's order. Okay, why do we perform component preparation? So a single whole blood unit can produce multiple blood components, and each of these components have different therapeutic properties that can be utilized to provide treatments for patients, and depending on the conditions needing treatment. And in order to achieve these properties, we need to perform component preparation. And this process of component preparation will maximize the blood's therapeutic properties. And since a single whole blood unit can produce multiple blood components, multiple patients can actually benefit from this single whole blood unit. So based from here, component preparation is therefore essential and necessary. And that is also the main reason why your transfusion practice is also termed as your transfusion medicine. These are the approved anticoagulant preservatives contained in blood bags. We have citrate, adenine, glucose or dextrose, and phosphate. So from the previous slide, we have mentioned that blood is both biologic and a drug. Most primarily in the transfusion medicine, they are utilized as a drug to provide treatment. However, since they are also biologic constituents, before we actually achieve their therapeutic properties, it required us to maintain these cells' viability during storage until before the date of use of these components or maintaining their viability before the actual transfusion takes place. And secondly, class, since these anticoagulant preservatives are already contained within blood bags, they also function to prevent blood clotting while on the collection process or collection procedure. And these are the exact main reasons why these are needed in blood bag units. So first, citrate. It chelates ionized calcium via binding or coupling reaction. And this action will inhibit all the calcium dependent steps of your coagulation cascade or pathway. And I believe you have already encountered and have discussed the coagulation pathway during your hemo 1. So your adenine will increase adenosine diphosphate levels with the blood bag during storage. And since blood is a living cell, they need food to survive. The glucose or dextrose will serve as fuel for the cells and serve as substrate also that will initiate the ATP production via anaerobic glycolysis during storage. And lastly, your sodium biphosphate is needed to maintain the pH levels of the blood unit, which is greatly essential for your 2 to 3 DPG levels within the blood unit during storage. And remember also from our lesson 1 discussion that 2-3 DPG is highly correlative with your pH, which pertains to your oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. During storage, however, take note that your 2 to 3 DPG levels actually decreases during the first 2 weeks of storage, but will regenerate levels within 12 to 24 hours of transfusion. So from our first lecture discussion on the introduction to immunohematology, we have explained into detail the absolute importance of your phosphate adenine to 3-DPG and glucose on your Embden-Meyerhof pathway. Take note that blood preservation's main goal actually is to promote the metabolic pathway of these cells via supplying the necessary nutrients and substances needed in order to initiate this cellular process to achieve its end goal or endpoint goal or main goal, and that is to maintain cellular viability. These are the primary anticoagulant preservatives used in blood banking. We have ACD or acid citrate dextrose, CPD or citrate phosphate dextrose, CP2D or citrate phosphate double dextrose, and CPDA1 or the citrate phosphate dextrose adenine. So as you can notice, class, that ACD, CPD, and CP2D all have 21 days shelf life, while CPDA1 has 35 days of shelf life. Why exactly? It is because it contains adenine, which is an important constituent of your Embden-Meyerhof pathway. Since it adds additional volume of adenine to the blood unit that will basically drive glycolysis towards the synthesis of ATP, the shelf life is extended up to 35 days. And take note that the date of expiration is at 12 midnight on the recorded date of expiration, regardless of the time of the preparation. However, if the component has been altered, for example, a frozen unit has been thawed prior to transfusion, then therefore it is already termed as an open system, meaning a component unit ready for transfusion already. And if a component unit is already an open system, its expiration will be 24 hours at 1 to 6 degrees centigrade. And this unit must be transfused within this time frame or to be transfused not exceeding 24 hours after an open system. Okay, next is your additive solutions. These are preserving solutions that are added to the RBCs after removal of the plasma component or after the plasma has been expressed to the satellite bag. An additive solution class contains SADMAN. Okay, for to make it more retention specific, SADMAN. Always remember when we talk about additive solutions that we are referring to the SADMAN or saline, adenine, dextrose or your glucose, and mannitol. These components will readily provide protection against storage-related hemolysis. And by the way, class, your mannitol here serves as your RBC membrane stabilizing agent during storage. We have here examples of additive solutions used in the blood banks. We have Adsol or AS1 or additive solution 1, Nutricell or AS3, and Optisol, also known as AS5. Take note, class, that both Adsol and Optisol contains SAGM or saline adenine glucose or dextrose and mannitol, as opposed to your Nutricell that do not contain mannitol but has CP or citrate phosphate as substitute solution. And all of these solutions are primarily designed to extend the shelf life of RBCs up to 42 days. Additive solutions class must be added within 72 hours after collection and having the final hematocrit value of 55% to 65% compared from the original non-additive RBCs having 80% hematocrit in normal physiology. Okay, now we all know that blood or RBC is viscous in nature. So the addition of additive solutions basically decreases hematocrit value of the blood unit via dilution mechanism, therefore making it less viscous. So from this concept class, the addition of additive solutions also facilitates an easier flow of the unit during the transfusion procedure. So I hope everyone's following. So your additive solution will extend the shelf life of RBCs up to 42 days. However, if the component unit has been altered or has been altered into an open system, the expiration of this unit changes from 42 days to 24 hours if unit is kept on 1 to 6 degrees centigrade, and from 42 days to 4 hours if unit is kept at 20 to 24 degrees centigrade. Moving on with your rejuvenation or rejuvenating solutions. Okay, class. Not all of the blood banks actually perform rejuvenation. There are few blood banks that utilizes this procedure. So if a RBC unit or units have been outdated or have expired up to 3 days from the outdate, we basically utilize Rejuvesol, which is the only FDA approved solution for this process. Take note, class, that a rejuvenating solution specifically contains your PIGPA or phosphate, inosine, glucose, pyruvate, and adenine. However, in some instances, only contains PIPA or phosphate, inosine, pyruvate, and adenine without your glucose or dextrose. And the main action of this solution basically restores, or the term is to replenish the depleted ATP and 2 to 3 DPG levels in RBC units. This rejuvenation process class or the mixing procedure of your uh, outdated RBC unit with the Rejuvesol actually takes at least 60 minutes and a maximum processing time of 4 hours, or a processing time of 1 to 4 hours at 37 degrees centigrade. And always remember that when an RBC is rejuvenated, it is already considered as an open system, which means that it must be transfused within 24 hours. Okay, this next two, your 5 and 6, are your cellular viability requirements. At least 70% of RBCs must remain viable at the end of the permitted storage period, and this is termed as your post-storage viability. And at least 75% of RBCs that have been transfused to a recipient should remain viable for 24 hours. And this is termed as your post-transfusion viability. And these are also the main differences between your post-storage viability and post-transfusion viability, in which the terms class are actually already descriptive of their differences. Okay, now, shipment of blood units, or when transporting a component unit, the container must have a constant temperature of 1 to 10 degrees centigrade. Lastly, inspection. All blood units must be inspected or examined in a daily basis and prior to issue or distribution of the unit for transfusion. This is to see to it last that the acceptability and integrity of the blood bag and seals, or the unit as a whole, are well maintained. We actually do this for one main reason, and that is to rule out the evidence or possibilities of contamination. But when a blood unit appears to have a purplish coloration, or the red cell mass, the presence of hemolysis, if there is a clot seen in an RBC unit, and when a plasma unit looks like cloudy or discolored, this frequently observed tangible or observable changes on a blood unit's appearance are indicative of contamination. So therefore, if a component unit was observed for contamination or was suspected for contamination, this unit must be removed and quarantined as pending decision for final disposition of the unit. Next, your storage lesions. This happens when your stored blood and blood products undergo biochemical changes, most particularly with the substances and the factors that are highly essential to their viability. So what causes your storage lesions? Your cellular environment within the body is greatly different from the environment within the blood bags, and this results to the biochemical changes to your blood products. And these biochemical changes that occur during storage is termed as your storage lesions. So tabulated here are the biochemical changes that occur during storage lesions. Going back with your blood and blood products as biologic constituents, it means that these cells are living cells, which exactly means that they need and consume energy for survival. So, for example, when RBC is collected and placed in a blood bag unit, therefore it is transferred from your body's environment to the blood bag, right? Since these are biologic cells, they will consume all the ready glucose supply within the unit, or they will direct instantly consume the glucose content of the blood bag unit for fuel or food, which decreases glucose levels within the blood bag unit, because basically they need this for the Embden-Meyerhof pathway. And for this anaerobic pathway to take place, class, we require the depletion of ATP molecules and as well as 2,3-DPG, thereby decreasing their levels within the blood bag unit. And since 2,3-DPG is decreasing, same goes with your pH, right? We have actually explained the mechanism before or during the um, oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve from the first lecture discussion. And in the other hand, class, basing from these biochemical changes and reactions along with their mechanisms, we can easily deduce that in storage lesions, there is an increased plasma hemoglobin, increase in plasma potassium, and of course, elevation of your plasma ammonium. And lastly, increased levels of lactic acid. So from the Embden-Meyerhof pathway, lactate is your byproduct or the waste generated by the anaerobic glycolysis. And the increase in the produced lactic acid from the metabolic pathway will decrease your pH. So in technical terms, kumbaga, napapanis yung blood in cases of storage lesions. And in cases, particularly in cases of high or elevation of lactic acid within blood bags. And class, regardless of the chemical substances and added preservatives, these units will undergo storage emissions. And that's exactly why, class, we only have a very minimal storage time or have a predetermined or a calculated shelf life of these units. So for your first question for the individual activity, briefly explain why in storage lesion there is a decreased plasma sodium and an increase in plasma potassium levels. We also have here RBC substitute or blood substitutes. These are categorized into hemoglobin-based oxygen carriers and perfluorochemicals. For hemoglobin-based oxygen carriers, we have stroma-free hemoglobin, polymerized hemoglobin, and liposome encapsulated hemoglobin. So question number two for your individual activity, briefly discuss RBC substitutes from hemoglobin-based to perfluorochemicals. When we perform blood donation or we donate blood, okay, I believe any one of you who have experienced donating blood can relate to. So the one collected and directly transferred to a blood bag unit is your whole blood. And when we say whole blood, it means whole, or it still contains the raw blood constituents that includes your cellular and plasma components, or this is the freshly collected blood that contains all blood constituents. A single whole blood unit contains an ideal hematocrit level of 38% and ideally 450 to 500 ml of blood, including the pre-measured anticoagulant used in the blood bag. So take note that whole blood also contains your labile coagulation factors. So however, these labile coagulation factors, including the platelets, are actually greatly affected in stored whole blood. Your labile coagulation factors diminishes over time and your whole blood class is ideally stored at 1 to 6 degrees centigrade wherein or the storage temperature 1 to 6 degrees Celsius makes your platelets non-functional. And these are few of the main reasons why there is really a need for component preparation to basically separate components like your platelets from your whole blood because the storage viable for whole blood differs from the storage viability for platelets. Whole blood is actually indicated in patients that needs both volume expansion and oxygen carrying capacity that may be due to extreme blood loss or patients with disease processes that reduces RBC count. However, class nowadays most blood banks no longer have whole blood units stored. They no longer transfuse, most often transfuse whole blood. Instead, we use and store packed red cells. And primarily because one aim of component preparation in the transfusion medicine is to benefit multiple patients from a single whole blood unit. Because basically, a single unit can produce multiple blood components and blood products that are needed for varying conditions or that are needed or to be dispensed in order to treat different or varying conditions. So if a patient only needs RBCs, then he can be transfused with packed red blood cells, saving now the other blood components that can be prepared from that single whole blood unit. Okay, moving on with your routine component preparation. First, we have packed red blood cells. And your red blood cells class contains your three major blood components such as red cells, platelets, and plasma component. So now, in order to obtain the red cells, we use the centrifugation process. Okay, from the previous slide, we have mentioned that the different centrifugation spin, time, and your spin speed will yield or produce different components. In this case, packed red cells or packed red blood cells can be produced or prepared via two ways. Heavy spin, or also termed as hard spin, with 5,000 grams for uh, 5 minutes when temperature is set at 4 degrees Celsius. And if the whole blood used is not intended for platelet concentrate preparation, so we can perform heavy spin to directly to directly separate packed red blood cells from the component. It can also be prepared via light spin, also known as soft spin and moderate spin. It ranges from 2 to 3 minutes centrifugation time with a spin speed of 3,200 grams or 2,000 grams for 3 minutes. When temperature is set at 22 degrees centigrade and if the whole blood is to be used for platelet concentrate preparation. So when we intend to perform a platelet concentration separation process from the whole single whole blood unit, we should use light spin. And if we do not intend to produce or manufacture platelet concentrate, we can use heavy spin already. So we have here illustrations of your blood bags. So prior to centrifugation, we have your whole blood. Using either moderate spin or harsh spin, we can harvest the packed red cells, and this is termed as packed red blood cells because after centrifugation, no matter this spin speed we use, red blood cells will always get packed at the bottom of the unit because red blood cells are the most dense of the cellular constituents present in this blood bag unit. So your packed red blood cells class is indicated for increasing RBC mass and oxygen carrying capacity, same as your whole blood. So take note that a unit of packed red blood cells must contain not less than 80% of hematocrit levels. And 1 unit of packed red blood cell will increase the hematocrit of non-bleeding patients by approximately 3% and hemoglobin by approximately 1 gram per deciliter. So we have here a nice illustration of a blood bag collection system at the upper left corner of the PowerPoint slide. So during blood donation, the extraction technique is venipuncture via closed collection system. This is termed closed collection system because there is no external air to have in contact with the blood being drawn from the donor. So this is to actually to ensure that there is no bacterial contamination and eventually bacterial growth to the blood bag. In a blood collection system class, there is always one primary bag, which is the largest bag from the collection system with the pre-measured anticoagulant and contains one or more satellite bags or transfer bags for component preparation. These bags class are made up of PVC, or polyvinyl chloride plastics that promotes its pliability, its flexibility, toughness, and so on. Also, class, take note that a blood bag must promote adequate gas exchange without evaporating its liquid contents. While your DEHP or di-2-ethylhexyl phthalate allows PVC configurations, which gives the a soft to highly flexible blood bag characteristics. And also, this gives transparency characteristic of the blood bag system. So if you have encountered blood bags before, you can notice that they are nearly transparent or translucent. That is because of the presence of di-2-ethylhexyl phthalate. So using the number one device or your plasma extractor device, we basically use pressure force to move or to transfer the plasma to the first satellite bag via the pilot tubes or these tubes connecting each blood bags. To prevent the plasma filling into the second satellite bag class, we normally clip the pilot tube that connects the first satellite bag to the second satellite bag. And that's exactly how we do it, class, in your blood bank sections. So assuming that both transfer bags are already filled with the appropriate containers, using this device, number two, or your heat sealing machine or pilot tube sealer, we seal the pilot tubes and give way for the additive solution to pass through and fill the primary bag with the required amount of the additive solution. So also take a closer look class at your pilot tubes on the pilot sealing machine. As you can notice, it is being sealed into segments. Take note, class, it is sealed into segments. Actually, we seal and divide the pilot tube into 13 to 15 segments. And by the way, class, your individual blood bags contain a unique serial number which is also encrypted on the pilot tubes. So we basically seal the pilot tubes into segments that contains the unique serial number of the blood bag unit. So these are now basically the aliquots of the blood unit that will be used for your number one cross-matching procedure prior to transfusion and serologic investigations prior to storage. Next, we have platelet concentrate. This unit is indicated for thrombocytopenic patients or those patients with a normal platelet count but are dysfunctional or non-functional. So this component can be harvested from whole blood via centrifugation and another procedure that includes platelet pheresis. Basing from this given illustration, so from whole blood, using light spin or also termed as soft spin, we are able to suspend or sediment the red cells and producing the supernatant, which is now your plasma containing your platelets. This supernatant is termed as your platelet-rich plasma. Then using the pilot tubes connecting the primary bag to your transfer or satellite bags class, we transfer this platelet-rich plasma via your plasma extractor device. So what happens next? We centrifuge this platelet-rich plasma using a hard spin or a heavy spin to separate the platelet-poor plasma as your supernatant this time and the platelet concentrate that is sedimented or suspended in the satellite bag. So take note that platelet unit derived, which is derived directly from whole blood, is known as your random donor platelet. And the whole blood to be used for the preparation of this random donor platelet must be processed within 6 to 8 hours after collection. So it varies depending on the anticoagulant preservative used. So for example, for ACD, the whole blood for RDP preparation must be processed within 6 hours, while 8 hours for CPD, CP2D, and CPDA1. So this whole blood for RDP should be maintained at 20 to 24 degrees centigrade. So take note of this class. For an RDP unit, it should contain at least the standard notation 5.5 times 10 to the 10th power for a single random donor platelet unit. And actually, in an individual RDP unit, we retain plasma of about 40 to 70 ml in order to provide the nutrients for these platelets. So this action also maintains the required pH level of greater than or equal to 6.2 according to Denise Harmening and 6.0 according naman kay Turgeon. However, in this case, we follow the pH of 6.2. So take note and always remember this values class because it comes out often during board exam reviews. So 1 RDP unit can increase the blood platelet count by 5,000 to 10,000 per microliters in a typical 70 kilogram adult human. Okay, class, this is a simplified summary of the centrifugation and the products produced from each process. So from the previous slide, we have mentioned that soft spin or light spin will sediment your red blood cells, forming your packed red blood cells and platelet-rich plasma as the supernatant. So we perform a second batch of centrifugation, but this time hard spin or heavy spin. And this will separate your platelet concentrate from the platelet poor plasma. So this time class, the sedimented component is your platelet concentrate while your platelet poor plasma is the supernatant. Okay, let's review the platelet concentrate component preparation. So in procedure, we have first centrifuge whole blood using light spin or soft spin or moderate spin to separate packed red blood cells from the platelet-rich plasma. So as you can see on this illustration, from whole blood, we use a soft spin and we separate packed red blood cells after centrifugation as the sedimented cellular constituent, the packed red blood cells, and the supernatant is your platelet-rich plasma. Okay, and then we perform a second batch of centrifugation via hard spin or heavy spin in order to separate platelet poor plasma and harvesting now your platelet concentrate. Okay, class, this platelet poor plasma can now be utilized for the preparation of your another blood components, which is frozen plasma or PF24 or plasma frozen within 24 hours. So approximately 50 ml of platelets should be left after the removal of platelet poor plasma. And also, I repeat, about 40 to 70% of plasma from the separation process must be retained to provide your platelet concentrate, the nourishment that they need during the storage and will facilitate the pH levels within the component unit, which will promote platelet survival and viability during your storage. So next, class, the two-step centrifugation process from light spin to hard spin, from soft spin to heavy spin, particularly will mechanically force your platelets to form aggregates or platelet aggregation because we all know that centrifugation mechanically forces cells to sediment via centrifugal force, meaning we make these cells to get closer together, which forms aggregates, referring to your platelets. So that's exactly why, class, for platelet concentrate units, they must be left undisturbed for at least 1 hour at room temperature before storage in order to enhance platelet disaggregation. So as an effect from the centrifugation, the two-way centrifugation process. Okay, platelets are actually stored at 20 to 24 degrees centigrade for 5 days in constant agitation. Okay, class, remember that platelet storage is performed on a constant agitation at 20 to 24 degrees centigrade for 5 days. And always remember the constant agitation class. This makes your platelet concentrate unique among your other blood components. So agitation is actually very important in platelets because number one, class, to prevent further platelet aggregation, and number two, to promote gas exchange. So those are two main factors that we attain when performing platelet storage agitation. So on its original outdate class, platelet concentrates can be viable for 5 days under constant agitation at room temperature. But when a platelet concentrate has been pooled or has been prepared ready for transfusion, it must be transfused within 4 hours of open system. We also have two kinds of platelet rotators. One is elliptical rotator and a 226 RPM circular um, rotators. So for your question number three, for your individual activity, describe the difference, describe and differentiate these two kinds of platelet rotators. Okay, now your platelet concentrates, as I have mentioned a while ago, can be obtained and prepared via whole blood and platelet pheresis. So from whole blood, we term this platelet concentrate as a random donor platelet, while if a platelet concentrate unit was prepared via platelet pheresis, we term this as single donor platelet. And a unit from a single donor platelet should contain at least the standard notation 3.0 times 10 to the 11 power platelets per unit, which is equivalent to 6 to 10 units of random donor platelet units. And the same as your random platelet class, unit or the SDP unit must contain sufficient amount of plasma to supply the nutrients for the unit and maintain a suitable pH for the platelet viability. And take note that one SDP unit can increase the blood platelet count by 30,000 to 6,000, 60,000 per UL. And the platelet count for the donor platelet pheresis should be at least 150,000 per UL. Okay, so moving on, we have your plasma component. Okay, at this stage, I believe that we have already mastered everything about blood components as to your serum and plasma. So talking about plasma and a quick review, this is the clear liquid portion of the whole blood, which actually contains your water, electrolytes, globulins, or antibodies. What else? Your very important clotting factors or coagulation factors. And these plasma constituents are stable at room temperature except for your labile factors, which are your factors 5 and factor 8. These factors class will deteriorate when the plasma is not stored at negative 18 degrees Celsius or lower. And that's exactly why class, in order to maintain maximum levels of factor 5 and factor 8, plasma units must be placed in a freezing environment within 6 to hours of collection. And that is now your fresh frozen plasma component. So if plasma unit has been prepared within 6 hours after collection, so if ACD is used, or within 8 hours after collection, if CPD, CP2D, or CPDA1 is used, we term the component as fresh frozen plasma. So if a plasma unit has been prepared within 24 hours after collection, we term the component as PF24 or plasma frozen within 24 hours. And your plasma components in general class are indicated as a replacement of the coagulation factors, particularly on severely bleeding patients, or that is used for therapeutic plasma exchange. Take note that your fresh frozen plasma is initially stored horizontally, but once frozen, the unit must be shifted to a vertical position, and this action will facilitate the migration of your air bubbles so that when thawed, this will be readily apparent or observed. So that is a technical or a practical skills that we are performing with that we always perform in the blood banks. And your frozen plasma class can be stored at two temperatures. For negative 18 degrees Celsius, it will have a storage time span of 1 year. And when the FFP is stored at negative 65 degrees centigrade, it will have a shelf life for up to 7 years on storage. And since FFP is basically a frozen component unit, it is self-explanatory that they must be thawed before transfusion or prior to transfusion. So thawing uses a 30 to 37 degrees centigrade heated water bath with agitation, and once thawing is complete, the product should be stored within 1 to 6 degrees centigrade and should be transfused within 24 hours. So why 24 hours? It is because the frozen unit has been thawed already, which means that it is already an open system. So basically, for an open system, they must be transfused within 24 hours. But in case of FFP, take note class that if this unit is not transfused within 24 hours, it can be restored or refrozen and must be labeled as thawed plasma, and that can be transfused for at most another 4 days, 4 days shelf life extension. So take note of all this information. Okay, next is your cryoprecipitate. This is a unit obtained or prepared from your fresh frozen plasma, and it contains your factors 8 and 13, also your fibronectin, what else? Fibrinogen, and your von Willebrand factor or your von Willebrand factor. This unit is used for the treatment of fibrinogen deficiencies, also hemophilia A, factor 8 deficiency, and your most famous von Willebrand's disease. Your cryoprecipitate, when combined with thrombin, will actually result in the formation of fibrin glue, which is used to control bleeding during your surgical operations. First procedure, we thaw the fresh frozen plasma obtained from your from the previous slide that was discussed a while ago. So we thaw the fresh frozen plasma, and we can actually perform thawing procedures via two ways. First is by using a regular blood bank refrigerator at 1 to 6 degrees centigrade. However, this will consume 14 to 16 hours thawing process. The second is by utilizing a circulating cryoprecipitate thaw bath with a temperature of 4 degrees centigrade, and this procedure will last for 4 hours. As compared to your blood bank refrigerator, this is way more time efficient and practical. Okay, now the endpoint of thawing is when you already have observed or noticed that the consistency of the fresh frozen plasma becomes slushy. Okay, the keyword here is slushy. Okay, third step when preparing cryoprecipitate, centrifuge at 4 degrees Celsius, the thawed unit using hard spin in order to separate the supernatant plasma from the precipitate. However, take note that we must leave approximately 10 to 15 ml of plasma on the precipitate during transfer of the supernatant plasma to the transfer bag. And the precipitate obtained is now termed as your cryoprecipitate, while the cryosupernatant fluid is the FFP with reduced cryoprecipitate. And your cryosupernatant class is completely devoid of your factors 8 and the von Willebrand factor. So take note, class, that your cryosupernatant is completely has a completely um, absence or devoid of your factors 8 and your von Willebrand factor multimers. So that is one of the most important key pointers here. Okay, glass. After centrifugation and the cryoprecipitate has been separated, these units must be refrozen immediately or within 1 hour from the time plasma reached the slushy stage to refreezing the unit, because a delay or if the processing exceeds 1 hour or when there is a prolonged exposure to high temperature, it will decline or significantly decrease your factor 8's activity levels in the blood unit. So it is imperative to make sure that the unit is refrozen as fast as possible. So a cryoprecipitate unit must contain 80 IU of factor 8 and approximately 150 milligrams of fibrinogen as per AABB standards. The final product lasts is stored at 18 degrees centigrade for 1 year or 12 months. While your cryopyr fluid is refrozen at negative 18 degrees Celsius and must be labeled as your plasma cryoprecipitate reduced. Okay, take note of the label, plasma cryoprecipitate reduced. So prior to transfusion, your cryoprecipitate should be thawed using a 37 degrees Celsius water bath for up to 15 minutes. When a unit was thawed, the unit must be transfused within 6 hours after thawing. So take note, class, this unit should be used within 6 hours after thawing. But when pooled units are required, they must be transfused within 4 hours. Why exactly do we need to transfuse these units as immediately as possible after an open system? It is because your factor 8 declines 2 hours after thawing, and that's exactly why it must be transfused as immediately as possible. So moving on with your special blood components. So these components are those that are to be dispensed via special orders of physicians to their patients. And well, of course, depending on the condition or the disease processes that a patient has. Number one is whole blood modified. So a single whole blood unit can be modified by having 50 ml of plasma removed in the preparation of platelets or 10 to 15 ml of plasma removed in the preparation of the cryoprecipitate component. And the same as your regular whole blood unit class, your whole blood modified is also indicated for mass expansion and oxygen carrying capacity. And the only or main difference is with a modified unit, we alter or simply modify the regular plasma volume content of the whole blood. So now, your plasma contains coagulation factors, globulins, and so on. So modifying the whole blood basically means that we are lessening, or the exact term is reducing the concentration of these plasma constituents prior to transfusion in order to suffice for the patient's disease condition or the conditions that medically demands for the reduction of these components prior to transfusion. So next, number two, irradiated components. Okay, a recall from your immunosero and hematology, all cellular components of blood actually contains viable white blood cells, primarily your lymphocytes. Yes, lymphocytes. In the transfusion medicine class, these lymphocytes can remarkably cause your graft versus host disease. And to what specific populations do we normally encounter GVHD? Most particularly to immunocompromised patients or recipients, or those patients that are not immune competent. And most especially, take note that your GVHD or graft versus host disease has been noted in transfusions among first degree family members because they may share actually the same human leukocyte antigen haplotypes. And that is exactly why, class, we perform irradiation, which basically inactivates, or the goal is to inhibit the proliferation of your T lymphocytes within the blood unit in order to prevent graft versus host disease. Okay, I hope everyone's following. So, irradiation is performed in order to inactivate the lymphocytes, which can cause graft versus host disease or GVHD. However, it cannot prevent febrile transfusion reactions. I mean, the irradiation of components do not prevent febrile transfusion reactions. And this is mainly because of the storage. What exactly happens is during storage, your white blood cells releases a substance known as your BRMS, or also termed as your biologic response modifiers, that can cause febrile reactions. So these BRMs are produced during storage. And as I have mentioned a while ago, that irradiation is performed prior to blood transfusion, which exactly means that your BRMs are already present within the blood bags, and the irradiation process will inhibit T cell proliferation but not the BRMs. And this is the main reason why, class, irradiation do not prevent febrile transfusion reactions. Okay, there are actually two irradiation sources that are available. We have X-rays from either cesium-137 or your cobalt-60, and X-rays from linear accelerators also. However, the cesium-137 is the most commonly used irradiation source. Okay, the required and accepted irradiation dose must be at least 2,500 centigrade and no more than 5,000 centigrade. And by the way, class, gray or centigrade is the new international system unit of radiation dose. So take note, class, when we say irradiation, we mostly or generally refer to your blood components with cellular constituents such as red blood cell units, whole blood units, with the exemption of your plasma and cryoprecipitate because these components are already cell-free or because these units have been separated via sedimentation from the centrifugation procedures. Okay, what are the effects of irradiation? So your RBC membranes may be slightly damaged by the irradiation procedure, and the RBC units that have been irradiated will have a shelf life of 28 days. But in case of platelet units, they are not affected by the effect of the irradiation doses since we all know platelets aren't cells but only cell fragments, which means to say that they don't have a composite membrane structures to be altered or to be damaged. Leucophore or leukoreduced component units are intended to prevent febrile transfusion reactions caused by reactive white blood cells and your biologic response modifiers, which includes your to be specific, it includes your pro-inflammatory cytokines, your WBC enzymes, and complement fragments, or can also be your WBC cell fragments that are products of your WBC degeneration during the storage period. There are actually two methods for leukoreduction. One is the pre-storage leukoreduction. Well, in this method, white blood cells are removed prior to storage, and the removal of WBCs before the storage can prevent the production of your biologic response modifiers during storage, which means that when using this method, it prevents febrile transfusion reactions that can be caused by both WBCs and the biologic response modifiers or BRMs. Okay, class. In a normal transfusion practice setting, pre-storage leukoreduction can be done in two ways. Okay, class, take note. One, during blood collection or blood donation procedure. So a leukoreduction filter attached to the blood collection system, which is performed as bedside procedure. So number two, using a leukoreduction filter attached to the blood collection system tube that runs directly to the satellite bag, transferring now your filtered cells. And this term is termed as an inline integral filter. So next is your post storage leukoreduction procedure. So as opposed to your pre-storage leukoreduction, this method performs white blood cells removal on a from storage unit or prior to transfusion. So thus the term post-storage leukoreduction, which means therefore that it can prevent febrile transfusion reactions caused by WBCs but not BRMs, since BRMs have already accumulated during the storage, which is actually or literally the same concept with your irradiated component, your post storage leukoreduction. Okay, take note, class. These are the quality control and accepted values after leukoreduction. So for a leukoreduced or red blood cells, it must retain 85% of the original red cell mass or red cell volume after the leukoreduction procedure, and the unit must have less than 5 million of leukocyte counts. The most common cause of failure on the leukoreduction procedure is a blood bag unit from a donor with sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. So when we say sickle cell anemia, it is a condition with a characteristic sickle cell RBC morphology, also termed as your meniscocyte or drepanocyte morphology, which basically interferes with the filtration procedure during the leukoreduction methods. So
Okay, we have different reduction method principles. We have filtration, inverted centrifugation, glucose sedimentation, saline washing, and double centrifugation. So for your item number 4, on your individual activity, describe briefly these principles of the Luke reduction method. Next, we have frozen and deglycerolized red blood cells. So, frozen blood is mainly used for storage of rare blood units like O negative, A negative, AB negative, what else? Also, an example, Bombay blood units. These are primarily stored as a supply of blood for autologous transfusion or as a supply of red cells having little or no plasma proteins, leukocytes, or platelets. And when we say autologous donation class, it technically means that saving your own blood unit for your future use. So, for example, I am an A-neg due to the extreme rarity of my blood type and in anticipation of future unavoidable circumstances and as a prophylactic action on my part, I am going to perform or for an autologous donation, which technically means that I am saving or storing my own blood unit for my future use. So I hope that made it clear. Okay, moving on, freezing your red blood cells or any blood products are actually damaging. And in order to prevent this from happening, we utilize special substances known as your cryoprotective agents to protect our blood and blood products during freezing storages. So take note, class, that these agents' main mechanism of action is to inhibit cellular fluid loss or dehydration and as a protective agents against the ice crystals that may damage the blood and blood products. We have two types of cryoprotective agents. We have the penetrating and non-penetrating. So for the penetrating agents, we have examples which include glycerol and dimethyl sulfoxide or the MSO, having glycerol as the most commonly used cryoprotective agent. So these are termed penetrating agents simply because these are small molecules that basically are able to permeate or enter the cells, thereby preventing fluid loss or cellular dehydration via turning these cells into ice forms or via hardening your blood and blood products by making them into ice forms. Next, for non-penetrating agents, we have hydroxyethyl starch, glucose, and polyvinyl pyrrolidone or PVP. These have large molecular compositions, and that's exactly why they do not have the ability to permeate or enter the cells. Thus, the term non-penetrating. And since they cannot enter the cells, what they do is they form shells that will surround the blood and blood products, and this action will prevent loss of water and cellular dehydration. So methods of freezing red blood cells. Number one, via high glycerol method. This is a slow, uncontrolled freezing method. Okay, class. Remember that high glycerol is the most commonly used freezing method. When using high glycerol, units are stored at negative 80 degrees centigrade using a mechanical freezer. Number two, low glycerol method, which is a rapid and more controlled freezing method. Units using low glycerol method are stored at negative 120 degrees centigrade using liquid nitrogen. So make sure to notice and take note of the main differences, class, of your high glycerol and low glycerol. So we have here the simplified general procedure of a frozen RBC unit. So your RBC unit and glycerol are each warmed to 25 to 37 degrees centigrade, and approximately 100 ml of your glycerol is added to the warmed RBC unit by gently mixing, then allowed to equilibrate or undisturbed for about 10 to 30 minutes. And the remaining glycerol class is transferred to a special polyolefin bag, which was made more resistant to breakage and damage compared to your usual PVC bags. So the glycerolized RBCs are added with slow agitation, then placed into a canister afterwards to give additional protection during your freezing. So the unit produced is now labeled as red blood cells frozen. Excuse me. Okay, one very important thing to notice, class, and remember, since this is part of proper labeling, you may have noticed that the term modified from the whole blood modified, and also your uh, word frozen on your red blood cells frozen were placed at the end of the component names. Particularly with these two, they may seem ungrammatical or misarranged sets of words, right? However, the main reason is in the practical or clinical laboratory perspective, we must retain these words into always into their verb tense or verb form. And if we place these terms before the component names, they become adjectives already. So, but given these circumstances, however, there are also few blood components that are named with verb descriptive adjectives. So be able to notice them. Okay, next, your washed red blood cells are basically the red blood cells remaining after washing with saline solution to remove the plasma content. So this unit is prepared by washing packed red blood cells via actually performing multiple batch processing through centrifugation and decanting the supernatant saline used for washing. Okay, this unit is mainly indicated for patients with IgA deficiency and for patients that develop multiple progressive allergic reactions with the previously transfused blood component units with that patient. So, okay, class, washing the RBCs is making this unit as an open system, which means therefore that it must be transfused within 24 hours after washing. So this unit is um, excuse me. Next, we have red blood cells aliquot. So this next unit is mainly or most often transfused or utilized during the neonatal period or infants younger than 4 months and patients with circulatory overload. So for neonates class, it is almost self-explanatory, right? That given the total body size and weight of the neonates or pediatric patients, we cannot directly transfuse an entire single component unit. And for this reason, we make aliquots, smaller aliquots of these component units for example, your packed red blood cells. Neonates only require about 10 to 25 ml for transfusion, depending on the total body weight of the neonate recipient. It can be prepared through closed system using a multiple pack system or a quad pack system, or also known as your blood bags with multiple satellite bags or transfer bags, or through an open system. And the aliquots from closed system will retain original outdate of the primary bag, while the aliquots prepared through an open system must be transfused within 24 hours. Next, we have neocyte-enriched red blood cells. So when we say neocytes class, these are actually young red blood cells that are given or transfused to patients with thalassemia or chronic conditions who are can potentially develop transfusion-induced hemochromatosis. Okay, given the pathophysiology of the thalassemia and hemochromatosis that I believe has been discussed during your hematology class, we can actually have a picture skew the of the potentiating effects of the packed red blood cells transfusion. So each ml of RBC contains about 1 milligram of iron, which theoretically can be deposited in tissues and can cause hemosiderosis. If neocytes with an average 90-day lifespan are transfused instead of conventional RBCs with an average of 60-day lifespan, the RBC transfusion requirements and the chance of inducing hemosiderosis may be reduced. So, how do we harvest neocyte-enriched red blood cells? Okay, this is based from their specific gravity. Your neocytes are larger and the less dense red blood cells and can therefore be harvested by collecting the first half of the unit during processing or during component preparation. Next, we have granulocyte concentrate. These are units given to patients with severe neutropenia who have a life-threatening systemic infection that are uncontrolled by antibiotics and or patients with bacterial sepsis. So, your granulocyte concentrate class is generally prepared from freshly collected unrefrigerated whole blood. We add 60 ml of HES or hydroxyethyl starch and then allowing the unit to rest for 1 hour. And then we perform first the centrifugation to sediment the red cells and transfer the supernatant plasma along with the buffy coat into a satellite bag. And then we perform the second centrifugation to sediment white blood cells while 90% of plasma should be removed and transferred into a second satellite bag. Then your granulocyte concentrate is harvested and must be stored at room temperature or 20 to 24 degrees centigrade without agitation. And this unit will expire after 24 hours after the collection process. And take note that granulocyte concentrate the transfusion of your granulocyte concentrate may proceed if the blood component unit and the recipient's blood are compatible. So it needs compatibility testing first before transfusion. Okay, number nine, we have synthetic volume expanders. So from the term itself, these are artificial substances that are used primarily for volume expansion as plasma volume substitute and colloid replacement. These are primarily class utilized to patients enduring from hemorrhagic shocks and burns. We have two categories of volume expanders. Okay, listed here are the main summary of the differences between crystalloid and colloid types. So starting with the table class, okay, colloid delivers more efficiency in terms of intravascular retention compared to your crystalloid types and mostly causing edema as side common effects is crystalloid types. Most specifically class for both peripheral and pulmonary edema. However, as opposed to your colloid, crystalloid types are easily excreted from the system. In terms of allergic reactions class, crystalloid do not exhibit occurrence of allergic reactions, while colloid types may exhibit only in rare cases. So as for the costing, crystalloids are cheaper compared to the colloid types. And crystalloid examples, we have here the Ringer's lactate solution and the 7.5% normal saline solution. While for colloid, we have albumin, we have dextran, and hydroxyethyl starch. And take note, class, that dextran is the actually the most commonly used plasma expander for plasma substitute and can be used to treat shock by increasing volume of the blood or blood volume. However, in patients who have just recently received dextran, rouleau formation may be observed in the serum or plasma samples, which causes your ABO discrepancy during the ABO typing. So specifically, what discrepancy does this dextran cause? Okay, your group 3 discrepancy. Okay, number 10, we have normal serum albumin and plasma protein fraction. Your NSA and PPF are actually prepared from salvage plasma, or also termed as recovered plasma, that are pooled and fractionated via cold alcohol process, also known as your con-ethanol fractionation, then treated with heat inactivation at 60 degrees centigrade for 10 hours. So, class, the main reason for heating is to inactivate all the coagulation factors within the unit. And so, okay, class, memorize these percentage values. Your NSA contains 96% albumin and 4% globulin, while PPF contains 83% albumin and 17% globulin. Your NSA and PPF are indicated in for patients who are hypovolemic and hypoproteinemic, and in patients with shock or burns. Both units are stored for 5 years at 2 to 10 degrees centigrade. And okay, moving on. Number 11 is your ISG, or immune serum globulins. So ISG is a concentrate of your globulins in an aqueous solution and can be prepared from pooled plasma via your cold ethanol fractionation. So preparations with ISG are actually in the form of intravenous or intramuscular solutions, and these units are primarily utilized for patients with immunodeficiency disease or disease processes that results to immunocompetence. Okay, next are your plasma derivatives, or your factor concentrates, or your coagulation factors. So particularly, these are harvested from pooled plasma using con-ethanol fractionation and followed by lyophilization in order to prevent transmission of viruses. We have three methods in eliminating viral contamination of these products. We have number one, pasteurization, and it involves addition of low molecular weight stabilizers such as albumin, sucrose, or glycine. These stabilizers are added in order to prevent denaturation of the desired components. Since this is pasteurization class, which means heating is involved. So the product is heated at 60 degrees centigrade for 10 hours straight. The stabilizers are removed afterwards and the product is then lyophilized. Okay, next we have solvent and detergent treatment. It involves the use of solvent, ethyl ether, and tri-N-butyl phosphate, and detergent as such as your sodium chlorate and twin AT to disrupt the viral coat membranes. The solvent detergent is then removed, and the final product is in lyophilized form, the same as your pasteurization. So so lastly, class, your monoclonal purification. So it involves immunoaffinity chromatography to positively select out from the pooled plasma the coagulation factor of interest. So just like in your monoclonal AHG reagent class, okay, your monoclonal purification procedure involves a special procedure that only or to only select the desired plasma derivative or coagulation factor of interest. Okay, now factor 8 concentrates are used for the treatment of classic hemophilia and hemophilia A in persons deficient in factor 8. And actually, your factor 8 has been studied to have or present other forms, which includes your xenographic form and recombinant factor. And your factor 9 products, these products are used primarily for the treatment of hemophilia B or for factor 9 deficiency, and like your factor 8 concentrates, your factor 9 products are also available in three forms. You have prothrombin complex, your factor 9 concentrates, and what else? Your recombinant factor 9. So for your item number um, 5, for the individual activity, describe briefly the different forms of your factor 8 concentrate and factor 9 products. Okay, moving on, in a typical blood bag component unit, these are the primary and basic labels or markings that we have. So we have here the ABORH blood group, in this particular example, group O, Rh positive. You also have the expiration date, special testing, component description, and the collection date and time. So we have at the upper portion both the ISBT donation number, which is actually comprised with 14 different characters, and the ISBT blood group code. As you can notice, class, all the labels are expressed and translated into character text and barcodes. This is because the mandatory standardized rule of the ISBT is that all blood bag labels must be machine readable and eye readable. And your ISBT 128 is a barcode symbology that was established way back 1994 to basically standardize the blood component labeling worldwide, and it aims to have a uniform looks of component blood bag unit labels, to have improved self-checking features and an improved traceability and fewer misreads, to have an expanded product host. Okay, now this is actually very important in order to have as many sets as possible and to have a non-repetitive donation number codes. So above all, this symbology also adds a layer of we call this safety in the transfusion setting. Okay, next we have storage unit requirements. So in blood bank, we are technically dealing or safekeeping very delicate and sensitive products, which are your blood components, which comprises your blood and blood products. And this requires us to extremely guarantee their viability until the actual transfusion takes place. So one of the most important and critical factor is the temperature monitoring, because failure to adhere to proper component storage temperature may threaten the viability and clinical effectiveness of these units. And that's exactly why, class, storage temperature must be monitored continuously and must be diligently recorded. So what are the storage unit requirements? Okay, number one, storage units or blood bank or refrigerators and freezers must be maintained clean and has sufficient capacity. It should also allow enough space for component segregations as to finished products, the unfinished products, and autologous and allogenic donation products. So number two, it must have an internal fan to circulate the air inside the unit, or to properly distribute the temperature throughout the storage unit to have a well equilibrated and consistent non-fluctuating temperatures for the stored components. And lastly, number three, it must have an alarm system. So why it is necessary to have an alarm system for storage units? Okay, class, this is to alarm or warn the medical technologists to take immediate response and corrective action whenever there is a potential temperature fluctuation within the storage unit. So how does it happen, class? So for example, and most common scenario in blood banks, when a medical technologist forgot to close the door of the storage unit, or there has been an overcrowding of component units within the storage unit, that the temperature will technically decline. So these changes on the temperature will automatically sensitize the alarm system to alarm, or basically warn the medical technologies that there has been a temperature change within the unit. You know, class, this alarm system is very loud, almost sounds like a siren or a time bomb timer, as I may describe it. This alarm sound, class, will not stop. It will only stop when the temperature has been corrected and turned back to the original, or not original, the normal storage temperature. So it is also imperative that an alarm system must have a high and low set points as per a standard operating procedures. And what do we mean by high and low set points? Okay, for example, the standard storage unit temperature is 1 to 6 degrees centigrade. For example, only, class, The high set point is 5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius for the low set point. So meaning to say, when the storage unit temperature became either of the two set points, the alarm system will be activated, and this is to give the medical technologists on duty to actually have ample time to make corrective actions before it hits to critical condition. And this is how protective and sensitive and precise our alarm system is. And this is also the main exact reason why these systems um, must be tested in a periodic basis or intervals to guarantee its integrity and that it is well functioning. Okay, that ends our recorded discussion on the component preparation. I hope everyone made good notes from the lecture, and if you have questions pertaining to this topic or any other pointers that interest you of asking, feel free to send them on my Messenger or FB account. Once again, thank you and have a nice day.